Hello there, my name's Amy from moonmindology.com, and today I'm looking at the chart of Alexei Navalny. And don't forget to head over to my website moonmindology.com if you would like to book a reading with me. Surprise, surprise! Putin won the election, and he came out and said that he had planned to release Navalny before his death in a prisoner swap with the West. And there is a rumour that Navalny died of a blood clot and wasn't assassinated, but a lot of news outlets are saying that he was assassinated. So let's have a look at his chart and see what we can work out as to who he was and perhaps what even happened to end his life. So Pluto is in the first house, and this is going to be somebody who wants to have control, and he may not even be aware of his own ambitions as they are so deep-seated. And he was someone who was power hungry, and there's an internal rage as well, and this can impact relationships, of course. His desire for power is essentially what did really lead to his demise, and whether or not you think it was an assassination, but we will look into that later, as I've said. Pluto is very explosive, and unfortunately, as popular as he was with the Russian youth, I do think that he could have been problematic as a leader, but it isn't something that we need to take, that we need to entertain now, because he's passed and it's never obviously going to happen. So the first ruler is in the 9th, and law and justice would have been really important to him, and I bet he was somebody who loved to travel and experience different cultures, and he was most likely very close to his father, and perhaps even religious as well. That's jumping out to me a lot. And the 9th house is really good, so he was probably really good at finding solutions to problems and good ethics as well. Sun and Mercury and a very strong Venus, they're all in the 9th. So he would have been really law focused, and you wouldn't be surprised, he did in fact obtain a law degree, and he would have done incredibly well at university looking at his chart, and I bet his father would have been a really huge encouragement for him to go into higher education as well. In some cases, I'd say that his father could probably be very pushy, but I wouldn't go as far as to say domineering, as there are such nice planets here, but I would say that his father was probably a very good communicator and was either artistic or charming. So Navalny would have been an excellent speaker himself as well, and I'd say he's very intellectual, and he may even have been interested in teaching. With a strong Mercury in the 9th, the reason he was always dealt with, in a more serious way instead of going through the courts is because I'd say he's an excellent lawyer, and he would have won any legal case that was put against him. Mercury in the 9th, it can also be public or mass communications, and he was indeed a political activist who spoke out against the government. And contrary to what we see on the news, he would have been a very lucky person with deep religious values as well. And as Venus is strong and related to the wife, there could be a good relationship with his wife, as this is really good for marriage. I would say that they probably had a very strong bond, and my condolences go to her. So there's a opposition between the Sun and Neptune, and this is really, really close. And the interesting thing about this is that I've seen this in a lot of charts where people can lose themselves, because Neptune is very, it's like the veil that goes over. It's cloudy, it's misty, you can't quite work out what it is, it's not quite real. And then you've got the Sun, which is the ego and the body. So it can sometimes be seen in people who can lose hope. They can lose touch with themselves, they can struggle to understand where their ego is, and there can also sometimes be a link to cases of suicide as well, but there would have to be other things in the chart, but it's there can be a sense of loss of oneself with that. Neptune's in the 3rd as well, so this makes somebody really creative, but there can be problems or misunderstandings with siblings, and there can be a separation, or there can be a sibling who has addiction problems. Another thing that I'll just say on Neptune and the Sun is that there can be a distance from his father as well. And not only that, because they're so close, when you get an outer planet and such a personal planet such as the sun, when they are so close, these people often tend to be remembered or have a deep impact on their community or the greater community or the world. And he did. Everybody knows, well, most people know who Navalny is. And, you know, he was a hot topic in not only Russian and Ukrainian media, but also he made it to the West as well. So Mars and Saturn, they're in the 11th. So he would have had many opportunities in his life, and he would have been associated with power, and in some mixes possibly aggressive people as well. His acquaintances and groups would have been really serious and disciplined, so he can mix with serious, competitive, aggressive groups, and that sounds to me like activism, and of course that's what he was. So there's also can be fighting between friends and great competition as well. Mars is very weak, so I'd say he doesn't have full control over his temper, and he may do extreme things to get to the point or get his point across. And this can also be linked to having a sibling or a close friend who is a great competitor. And, you know, there can also be a lot of problems with his brother as well. I'd say it's almost like working in a rivalry looking at this. I don't know much about his brother. But there can be also money made through technology, mechanics, and weapons. So it's a sign he's very intelligent, as there's an aspect from Mars to his 5th house of intelligence. And with Saturn here, it says that, you know, his luck would have improved after his 36th year. And when was he 36? In 2012. And this is around the time that his political influence really started to grow, because, you know, he was making news headlines because of his activism. So this gave him renown in his group or political party. One thing that I will say is that as Mars is weak and afflicted, there is a possibility that he did have problems with blood and muscular problems. So a blood clot is not something that I would be particularly surprised about with this. Especially as I go on, you'll see he's a very he's the sort of person that needs to be doing something, and when you can find that sort of person, there can be sickness. But Mars is in Assassinated, and this is the nakshatra of poisons and great intensity. So, you know, this is the serpent. It can be sneaky and dangerous, and Navalny was incredibly intelligent, and he was indeed a real threat as far as I can see here. And, you know, he would have fought the law quite well, because that's what he really cared about. And, you know, if he was still alive, if he'd gone down more so the law route as opposed to the activism route, perhaps, you know, they may not have been able to get him like this, but, you know, it's unfortunate. So his Saturn is in Pusha, and this is really saintly nakshatra, and this house is so intense. He really believed in his cause, and he felt that he knew, you know, something had to be done, and, you know, there's an arrogance here as well. And, you know, he would have been very devoted to coming back and shouting, even after being poisoned, partially blinded and put in danger. And, you know, this is intense devotion. And I would link that really to this, this deeply religious and dedicated nakshatra that is Pushya. I mean, that's crazy if you ask me. I mean, if I was harmed in any situation, I'd be like, nope. So Mars and Saturn together, it creates a real hard worker. And, you know, in the 11th, it's all about humanitarian causes and deep beliefs as well. And, you know, he did the work because I think he felt someone needed to do it, and he was the guy to do it. He's a workaholic, and, you know, I'd say he lived that cause, and that was his whole meaning. And there can also be some chronic frustration as well. And that could result in inappropriate actions, just out of the need to do something, anything. So Saturn also aspects the ascendant, and this makes him very serious and responsible, and I think he truly did have the weight of the world, or at least the entirety of Russia and possibly Ukraine, on his shoulders. And he wasn't really the sort of person that would have spent time relaxing. The world was always calling him to do something. The moon is in the 12th, and this would make somebody very emotional, and I'd say his feelings would have been able to impact his health as well. And he would be I think he would actually be quite a shy, introverted person if you met him. I'd say he's a history enthusiast, and he'd feel really deeply connected to his heritage as well. And I know that he said that he considered himself to be half Ukrainian and half Russian. So there's also an interest in cultures as well. And I think he did spend a bit of time in Ukraine as a child with his grandmother, and I think there's something to do with that, and that's why he has a deep connection to the two sides of his heritage. But I can see here there could be some separation from his mother, but I couldn't find anything to really support any problems with his parents on Wikipedia. There can be problems with his friends letting him down as well, but overall he has this great interest in charitable works. And equally, the 12th house is of confinement as well, so there can be hospitalization or incarceration due to friends and social groups or political groups. Then we've got Rahu and Uranus in the 2nd, so there can be a lot of turbulence in early life, and there can be emotional issues as well. There's something about maybe early security and his sense of security that can feel really unstable. And as with both Rahu and Uranus, they are very unorthodox. So there could have been something unusual in his early life. There could have been some kind of financial issue for his parents, or something that resulted in him always feeling threatened. As we've got malefic aspects and occupation of the 2nd house, there's a weakness to teeth. And there can also be problems with the right eye. And in 2017, he was at some rally or was protesting, and he had this blue liquid chemical that was thrown all over his face, and that resulted in him losing 80% of his vision in his right eye. And you know, you can see it here, but we'll touch that more later on. There can be money made through questionable means in some cases if you've got a really afflicted 2nd house, and it can give somebody a foul mouth, or you know, somebody that speaks out and gets them in trouble. And he was no short of trouble. There was lots of trouble for his activism. And he may have had an unusual speaking style as well, which stood out and made him interesting to other people. There's an aspect from Mars to Rahu, and this would have made him very ambitious, and his main focus would really have been security and, you know, getting a sense of that. So this is quite an angry combination, which can lead to explosive anger. And it's also somebody who wants to be in leadership, and there can be a lot of need for stimulation. And this guy would have always been powering towards some kind of goal. He always would have been working on something. I don't imagine he was the sort of person to stay at home and, you know, go on the family holidays, because he's just the mind is racing. He's intelligent, he's frustrated, he's angry, he wants to do something. Jupiter and Ketu are in the 8th house, and these are two planets that are all about faith, and there can be an idolization or a great feeling of fear that can manifest as a passive aggression. And I'm not saying that he necessarily had a call from God to go out and do the activism he did, but there certainly would have been a calling, and he would have known, you know, I'm the guy to do this. It was destiny, and you know, it's further shown by Kala Sarpa Yoga, as this intensifies everything and really brings a life of fate. You know, these people can't just go and do what they want to do. There's purpose and there's intensity, and I think he would have absolutely known his lot in life, and he knew what he was up to, and his dedication was something that, you know, I can't even understand that. You know, especially as you've got two planets in the 8th house, he would have potentially had psychic messages that came to him, and he would have been fascinated by occult subjects as well. I would guarantee that. you know, I think he may have worked in the economy and with trading at some point. So, you know, there's also trouble with foreign travel when we're looking at this house as well. And of course, he had to flee the country, I believe. There can be accidents, near-death experiences in his life, but I don't think that he was one that particularly feared death. Looking at this, there's deception around money as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if with the trading world that he worked in, you know, that led him to discover some kind of institutional corruption that he had to fight against. But I reckon he was probably caught up in it, and then when he tried to blow the whistle, you know, he got in trouble. And all trading across the world, I believe, is like that, and that is why it is linked to the 8th. It's a mafioso kind of energy going on there, and you know, looking at this, perhaps he was neck deep in it. So then we've got Jupiter. It rules 2 angles, so it does lose the ability to bring prosperity to him. And you know, this causes a lot of problems in the 8th house as well. And you know, this is probably part of the reason why he was at risk a lot, as this is the death house and this is accidents as well. So Ketu aspects the moon, and you know, this certainly would have made his mother somewhat distant, or she could have been psychic or maybe spiritual. But you know, I'd say that there's phobias potentially, and you know, he didn't really feel like he connected or bonded with other people, and there can be a sense of loneliness. But another thing that this aspect can do is it can create a sense of feeling great injustice, which would have added to already the anger that we have in the chart. Jupiter loosely aspected the moon, but this would have brought him a lot of luck and allowed him to hold on to a positive outlook for the most part. And it's a good aspect for marriage as well, and it brings optimism. And once again, it's good for education, morals, as well as intelligence. So let's have a quick look at some of the main events in his life. So as I said earlier, in 2017, on the 27th of April, he was attacked with some chemicals that affected his vision. And at that time, he was in the grand cycle of Mars. He hadn't long been gone into that Rahu Dasha. And as we can see, Mars aspects the 2nd house of security and the right eye. So when he started that Dasha, that would have been when he started to have problems. Not only that, Ashlesha is about chemicals. So with the aspect from Mars to Rahu, this was distorted and blown out of proportion, probably because Uranus is also hit there. So this is the planet of sudden change. So when this extreme is then impacted by aggressive Mars, it can be chemical attacks or physical attacks. In 2020, the 20th of August, Navalny was poisoned and he was in the cycle of Mars and Ketu. Again, we've already explored that Mars was problematic for him. And we also have Ketu, which is in the 8th house. So this is scandal, disgrace, and the possibility of even secret agencies trying to find him. So there's a lot of 8th house energy here as well. And these 2 planets can be very extreme together, and they're often linked to terrorism. That's talking about Mars and Ketu. So, you know, political poisoning, that could be classed as terrorism, I guess. You know, it's politically motivated violence. But then again, I believe that he was in trouble for acts of terrorism and extremism. So this is very much a combination that, you know, detaches people from their body and they focus on their message and the ideals. So, you know, I don't think he cared what happened to him, especially during this time of 2020, as that, you know, it was so prominent, these you know, emotions and these dashas. So in January 2021, that's when he was imprisoned, and he was in the cycle of Mars and Venus. And of course, this is so interesting because, you know, Venus is a really good planet. It's in its own house. It's sitting next to a benefic, friendly planet. So, you know, you'd expect things to improve. But, you know, although it brought him a lot of fame and he got his message spread about during this time, you know, Venus does rule the 2nd house. So it's about his security as well. So, you know, we still have Mars causing trouble for him. The The one thing that I really can see which might be of interest is that the 1st, 2nd and 12th rulers are all together, and that is, you know, I would take that as a literal thing of him personally, his security, and him being confined, which is essentially what happened. Perhaps this played a part in his imprisonment and activated the chart in this way. And, you know, it just goes to show when you are in the subdasha of a good planet, if the Mahadasha planet is problematic, then it can sometimes override the positive. I personally experienced this during my Saturn Dasha, and it really was a tough ride the whole way through. And I do think that unless you have a really particularly powerful, positive, good, malefic planet in your chart, the grand cycles or mahadashas of these malefic planets are hard work in general, and they're just going to be challenging. But we call it character building, the chapters in our lives. But one thing I will say about Venus is it's sitting at 16 degrees and 38 minutes, which is within 18 minutes of the star Aldebaran. And this is the star of great energy, popularity and honours, but, you know, there's a cost, and that's danger from enemies. So it's a warmongering star, and he spent a lot of years at war with the government. Finally, Navalny died in the current dasha of Rahu, so it's the grand cycle, the Mahadasha. And this is really significant because Rahu is in the 2nd house, which is a killer house. And as I've said before, with a weak Mars aspect, you know, he could well have had a blood clot. The influence of Rahu is really extreme, and there could have been sudden change, but I do think there is a potential of something aggressive happening to play a part in his death. Jupiter's quite problematic as a planet, and it aspects Rahu, and, you know, these two together is really magnified. It pulls all this 8th house energy, so it really could be about money or some kind of secrets. Even the nakshatra of Swati is sudden and it goes with the flow, but as I've said, it's Mars that has that poisonous impact. But interestingly, Swati is associated with survivors, so I'll leave that down to you as to whether you want to launch a conspiracy as to whether he's actually dead or not. But I would say he did meet his end, unfortunately, and this was his ultimate life purpose, if you like. But I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and comment. Thank you very much. See you next week. Bye.